part of that digitization is autonomous vessels, which I think also is very interesting. So looking into which sort of connects all the different innovation areas in one single point. And that is, if you have autonomous vessels and you have other autonomous systems, then you can sort of abandon the whole business logic of yesterday.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners, and welcome to episode 187 of the Shipping Podcast. Whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you for tuning in. This is where we talk about the coolest industry on the planet and help raise the maritime industry's profile. In this episode, I am in a conversation with someone outside the maritime industry, in the logistics industry. Freddy is a new acquaintance in my network. He has a geostrategic perspective on logistics, which I find very interesting, especially these days. Freddy Jönsson Hanberg is head of strategic advice at the MW Group in Stockholm, and his area of expertise is in knowing what impact uncertainties will have on the supply chain. I hope you will enjoy our conversation, which took place on April the 25th, 2022. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Of course. My name is Freddy Jönsson Hanberg. I'm 53 years old. I live in Stockholm, and I have a few different backgrounds, so to say, that are relevant for this pod. First of all, I am a reserve officer in the Swedish Armed Forces, where I have been working most of the time with logistic issues. So it has been about transporting goods around the globe, of course, when the armed forces were in Afghanistan and Mali, etc. But also quite a lot of national challenges in connection with the armed forces logistics. And then I have also been working with private sector development for the World Bank, been doing a lot of funding of those projects, as well as I've been working with private investments. It's more of a corporate finance project, actually. And finally, I have been the last maybe 6 or 7 years, I've been an advisor, mainly within this area, geostrategic aspects of factors that affect the private sector, so to speak.
And what is your educational background? I want to inspire the students listening to this.
I have various academic courses in my background. I'm been educated in quality development, for example, which is quite unusual. I've done it's a so-called micro master at the MIT, actually, in supply chain management. That I can recommend the students to do, as it is completely that you can do on your computer at home. So, and it's a really good course. Then from the very beginning, I was actually studying international relations at the Gothenburg University, but that was 30 years ago. So, and then I've been doing a lot of other things. And of course, I have the military training. So I'm a rank major, which means I've been studying at the National Defense College, where I actually also studied logistics, operational and strategic logistics in a military context.
You're a jack of all trades.
Maybe. Yeah.
So what is your job today? What is your responsibility?
Most of the time, I'm head of strategic advice at a company called MW Group. MW Group is a service company within military security. Also, actually, quite a lot with relation to logistics. We recently started a subsidiary called LogSec, where we assist private sector, but maybe in the beginning mostly public sector with readiness stocks, which is a challenge now when we are trying to rebuild the total defense. And then we also have an interesting area, which is we fly drones for the forest industry and measure the forest development. And we also help the telecom industry with installing connectivity infrastructure, so to speak. But in my department, I work with the large companies and governmental agencies, giving them advice on how to handle the changes that are going on right now, or maybe since 3, 4, 5 years, that it's all about security policy. Geostrategic environment is changing rapidly. US, China, we have war, Russia, Ukraine, etc. So that is what I mostly do. And I would like to mention also that I have a part-time employment at RISE, Research Institutes of Sweden, where I am a project manager for a project looking into national flow security, which is really relevant for this pod. And also I'm exercise director for a NATO exercise later on this year that looks into energy security for renewable energy, which is quite new. I think that would be the world's first exercise on that subject.
Sounds like you have exciting days.
Yeah, they are quite filled up, actually. I don't know how I'm supposed to manage all this, but I have good assistance from very good people.
So what are the trends?
I know that you have been talking to a lot of people about this, and I think most of us that are looking into the supply chain and logistics system globally have seen the same thing in the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years. And I usually use a metaphor that if you transport a bathtub full of water, and as long as you drive slowly forwards, everything is fine. The water is still there in the bathtub. But if you do a sudden break, the water will then splash to the front and then to the back and then to the front a couple of times. And I think we are in the middle of that sort of shaking of that water or the water flowing back and forth, because once we got into the pandemic, the bottlenecks were really clearly exposed. And I mean, we saw that in the harbors, the ports of California, in Los Angeles and Long Beach, quite early with the congestion there. And we're seeing it in Shanghai these days, same sort of even worse congestion there. But I wouldn't connect that to the war. I wouldn't connect it to the geostrategic change either. I think it's the supply chains are overstrained, and for many reasons, many different reasons. But of course, coming from me and what I'm looking into mostly during my work days is the security or the politicization of the supply chain, which I have actually written about. Because you can see it's not only the transport system as a whole, but maybe specifically the transport and logistics infrastructure that is politicized. And that the most common examples to give is China buying, 51% of Piraeus harbor in Greece, for example, and transport nodes in Poland, and we are seeing Sri Lanka. And we are seeing a lot of those activities, not to mention the Belt and Road Initiative, which in turn is a geostrategic project, which is completely based on transport infrastructures. I mean, that is of course the major trend that I'm looking into, but there are several others.
But you are sort of, if you excuse me, outside shipping or maritime?
I am definitely outside shipping and maritime. My background is definitely based on solid ground. I'm not very much of a seaman myself. I avoid going to sea, actually.
So what changes do you see from our side?
I think that one big thing that we are looking into at RISE for the moment is the shipping, the business model of shipping being challenged. And I think that if you look at container shipping, you have four big actors that are competing, and they are very strong. They dominate the market. But if you want to look into the future there, you were asking about trends, and I think one trend obviously is that their model and their dominance will be challenged. And I think what you can see, I mean, there are several reasons for that, and there are several ways to challenge it. But one way that I think we will see the impact of quite soon is that when you get some kind of database or structured data regarding shipment movements across the globe, which you can, I mean, AIS data is open data. You can use it, put it in an algorithm, or create a digital twin, and then you can emulate or simulate different scenarios. And then you can also predict how these shipments will turn out over maybe the next year or next year's coming years. And when you do that, then you can much easier than before, sort of reveal where the weaknesses are, where the bottlenecks will be, where you can make a lot of money, where you can save a lot of money, or where you will have cost raises or cost increasements of any kind. And if you can see all that, if you can make a model of that, and you can use it as a tool for predicament or making forecasts with that, then you can start challenging this business model. You can challenge price models, and you can also challenge, even down to singular routes, you can start to challenge that. But we are not quite there yet, but we are definitely getting there. It's coming. So, I mean, that is just one example.
Well, there are companies that is already doing that in our industry for the container business.
Yeah.
But I usually say that there are so many small ship owners. I mean, the average ship owner owns 10 ships. So that will be a little bit more difficult to follow them and to find the pattern in that and so on. I think maybe that the challenge is more in the ports. Their way of digitizing and digitalizing their work and offering that to the ship owners, to the cargo owners, and what you were talking about before, about energy. I mean, to look upon a port as a hub for energy, that is something that is happening now. A new way of looking at a port. It's not only a port.
Absolutely.
It's a hub.
It's a hub for information as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, connected, I'm definitely not an expert on algorithms and data and AI, machine learning, etc. But as I understand it, we have just begun to see the possibilities and the implications of harvesting those extreme volumes of data that in the end will, first of all, I think it will become more transparent, mainly for the larger audiences, for the consumers, for the goods owners and the companies that want to transport their goods. It will become more transparent. And I think that's a way of democratizing transports in a way. As it is right now, it's a little bit of an oligopoly. I mean, it's a few actors that really control it. And if you also take into consideration the geopolitical actors wanting to be in control of transport systems, then I think this is an interesting counter sort of movement that is going on. But in that case, I don't think we have seen the full scale of it. I think we are definitely in the beginning of that. I don't know if it will work out as we hope. I mean, researchers are quite naive often and only see possibilities and forget about politics. But so that it might be quite a tough challenge. But it's giving at least it's giving me a lot of hope, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Me too. I think we will benefit from being more open and transparent, and we will be forced into that if we don't do it ourselves, I think. Because we should be equally good, transparent as the other legs of a supply chain.
Absolutely.
I mean, we can't continue to try and not to be transparent.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned energy, and if you start to build on that, because you have a legislation or regulation situation regarding, for example, CO2 emittents and how to mitigate and lower CO2, there you have a much larger understanding from all parties. You have sort of positive commitments from different parties on that issue. And you can start there, which we did at RISE. We started there when we started to look into the AIS data for shipping in the last 10 years. The purpose there was to look at the CO2. and to reduce that. But then you add on what you said about ports being hubs for energy. And then you look at, okay, if we have electrification of vessels and ports, then you can start sort of pushing that agenda from that direction. But if you start pushing it from another direction, then you might encounter a lot of resistance. So I think if you start in that area and build from that, then you can have the other effects more or less as a bonus effect. So I think it's a very good thing to. I totally agree with looking at ports as an energy hub and make it an enabler for electrification of shipping, of the shipping industry. I think that is a good way to start. But I think maybe we are even more early there in the phase, because I don't know how many years is it left before Stena Electra, or what's the name? When will it be set to sea? Do you know that? It's a few years left.
It's a few years left. I can't remember, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, in 10 years maybe, but I think it's a good way. It's a good angle. It's a good way to attack it from the climate perspective, so to say.
And we can't have this discussion without talking about the current war, Ukrainian invasion.
Mm-hmm.
So how has that affected supply chain in general?
There are different areas and different time perspectives, because if you look at the food industry and you look at wheat and you look at the sunflower oil, for example, those two raw materials or goods, or how to express it, it depends on which industry you're in, but I mean mainly that is raw material for a number of other food derivatives, so to speak. You do bread from wheat, and you use wheat starch in a number of applications, and you use sunflower oil in a number of different food items. But starting there, you can immediately see that the spring wheat is definitely gone. I mean, there's a war going on there, at least for Ukraine. But for Russia, I'm not sure. Maybe they can export some wheat. Ukraine and Russia is delivering 30% of the wheat globally. But you can then long-term see that there will probably be no winter wheat either. So, I mean, this effect will be both short-term and long-term. And that's just an example. Then you have the secondary effect, which I use Egypt as an example, where you have government subsidies. They have guaranteed the people of Egypt that 20 loaves of bread should cost exactly a specific price. And right now, I think they are $1.5 billion minus on that budget. They don't know how to fund that right now. And they know from the history that every time they do anything about the bread prices in Egypt, there will be unrest in the streets. There will be political unrest and fighting in the streets, etc. So this is just one example of how it affects prices. Of course, the shortage will lead to higher prices. It will lead to higher prices everywhere in the world, especially if you look at then different products that are depending on wheat or sunflower oil for that matter. And then you will have secondary effects. And then you can take any other export, any other raw material that you have, for example, a number of metals and you have a number of other raw materials that you need to have to be able to produce fertilizer, for example. That's also a good example. If you want to produce fertilizer, then you need gas, you need a number of other raw materials that you also get mainly from Russia, actually. So you will definitely have higher prices on fertilizer globally. And then you will again have the secondary effect where if both the oil price is high, I mean, we know that the diesel price in Sweden is very high and in other countries as well. You combine the high diesel prices with the high prices for fertilizer, and then you will have increased costs in farming, in agriculture business areas. And that will lead to higher prices in the end for the consumer. If you look at the rich world, so to say, in EU, United States, I mean, North America, Australia, etc., Japan, then the consumers probably will have no problem sort of adopting to those prices. But then in other countries, in other parts of the world, this will be a huge challenge. And I'm not sure if it will lead to fighting in the streets as it will in Egypt, probably. But but it will lead to a number of other problems. You will have, we know, I mean, it's the history books are full of examples of when consumer prices go up, then, I mean, the households will not spend as much, they will not save as much, then other prices will fall. So the nightmare is that you have a lower growth rate and then you have higher prices, which is called stagflation. And it seems like we are sort of heading for that. And at the same time, we're seeing central banks raising the interest rate. So everything is going in the wrong direction right now. And this is only the macroeconomic part of it. We also have a number of security policy issues here.
No, I'm amazed. I'm totally into what you're talking about, and the security is also very interesting. Please continue.
I continue, yeah. Because if you only look into mainstream media news, then you will probably only get news about, I mean, on a quite detailed level on what's going on in Ukraine. But at the same time, we are seeing China doing, I will give a few examples. We have seen Chinese fighter and bomber aircrafts going in Taiwanese no-fly zone a number of times the last few years. I think the last time was in January. Quite a lot of fighters, approximately 40 fighter planes and bomber planes went into the no-fly zone and or the exclusion zone. They use a little bit of different terms. It's not Taiwanese territorial intrusions, but it's in the no-fly zone. And at the same time, we have seen that the Chinese military have done a lot of tests with hypersonic missiles. So they succeeded with one test a few months ago where they flew a hypersonic vessel, so to speak. It was more or less a rocket with a smaller missile on that could fly around the world, around the globe. And then, which means that the contiguous United States, in the United States, they are mostly looking north for Russian or North Korean missiles coming from over the Arctic. But this time they can fly the other way around, so they can come from the southern direction over the Antarctic and up from the south towards the contiguous United States. And this is a game changer. The head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miley, he said this is a Sputnik moment. We realize now that we are behind China development of these type of systems. They have also been blowing up satellites. They have been changing the trajectory of satellites to stop other satellites, still on their own satellites, but as a test. And finally, now the last thing that we saw just the last week, I think it was, or a few weeks ago, they started to negotiate or actually finalize a negotiation with the Solomon Islands outside New Zealand, north of New Zealand, where they are. The US is suspecting that China want to establish some kind of naval base there. And then we have Cuba crisis, similar situation, where they can reach Australia with missiles from there, and also maybe Guam and other places. So a lot of things happen outside the mainstream media, what you read every day, that is quite serious. And I'm just giving these examples to show that the security situation globally is deteriorating quite quickly. And the United States, with its allies, is continuously being challenged in different ways. And there are a lot of more things going on. But I mean, China, most of the listeners probably are interested in China and can follow what's happening in China in different other media. So I mentioned them for now.
If we go back to the pandemic, I mean, so many things happened during the pandemic, I think, that made us or forced us into change our behavior, to do things differently. For instance, I spoke with someone who was a ship broker in Bangladesh, I think, and she said, well, the guy who used to be standing on the port side with all the cash is not here anymore. He's at home, he's sick. And at that time, all the lorry drivers were also home sick. Mm. So everything was up and down. But what they wanted was, we need to get digitized documents now when it comes to bill of lading and all of that. And we also need digitized payment because we can't continue like this. Is that something you have seen also as a result of the pandemic, that more things get more digitized, pushing us into the digitalization?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm not an expert on digitalized or digitized payments or even. I mean, I'm fully aware of a lot of or a few of the projects that have been going on for a number of years in Sweden and I mean a few other countries. You have the foundation already there, so I think the pandemic definitely speeded that up. I've been talking to a network of electronic affairs in Sweden once, and their impression was that their business had boomed during the pandemic. So I mean, what you have seen or experienced, I think it's definitely true. How it is outside these very well-known and very well-established systems, I have no idea. I can imagine that what you are describing is definitely has had a boost during the pandemic, but I'm not sure.
And then that leads us into cybersecurity in a way, because in Sweden, I think we are cashless. We don't use cash anymore. We have so many digital transactions, which means what will happen if that is interrupted?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I mean, payments are not only about money or coins and bills or not even numbers on the computer screen. It's also about power supply. I mean, if you want to go to a shop or a supermarket and buy something and the power is out, then the cash system also is out. So even if you have coins and bills, you will not be able to pay anyway. So the payment system is very, very vulnerable. And there has been a few studies I know from, for example, University in Skövde. They have had simulations of what happens in a society when the payment system goes down. And normally, if I connect back to your original question about cybersecurity, then I think that the central systems, the central banks, the largest banks, I think they have today reached a level of really high and sufficient cybersecurity levels. But if it were only about them, everything would be fine. But it's not. And I think what you're talking about, also connected to the last question about digitalized payments for the supply chain, then we come down to, I mean, every little company you mentioned, have a few container boats, or maybe they have a few trucks and lorries. Then you have the supplier, then you have the customer, and you have a lot of small and middle-sized companies that don't really have any other alternatives than to use what they use today. You and I remember when you can write a note that said, it was a debt note that said, okay, I received these goods, and now I owe you this, and I signed it and I put a stamp on it or something like that, and then that was valid. But that doesn't work like that anymore. And I think that's a problem that you can see throughout the whole judicial system, actually, that trust is only based on these sort of day-to-day systems that are very vulnerable. Trust is not sort of found anywhere else. If you can have all these romantic memories of going to a very small shop and saying hello, and you know each other by name, and you took some goods from there, and you signed your on a piece of paper, and you can pay in the end of each month, etc. But that type of trust, especially in larger cities, and even more so, of course, in the global supply chain system, is not there like that. Like it was a long time ago, but it was there once.
I claim that the maritime industry is like the Cinderella story. Mm-hmm. No one knows about us. Mm-hmm. So how can we become more visible? What do you think?
It would be strange if I didn't answer with something connected to technology and innovation because of what I work with. But I think actually that is a good answer. I think that the maritime industry should look very much into what could the branch or the sector do to be much more leading and be sort of leading the innovation in this area, because I think there is a lot of potential in business models to find new ways of making money together. Innovation regarding, we talked about electrification, digitization of the whole industry, also very good. Also, I think part of that digitization is autonomous vessels, which I think also is very interesting. So looking into which sort of connects all the different innovation areas in one single point. And that is, if you have autonomous vessels and you have other autonomous systems, then you can sort of abandon the whole business logic of yesterday. Because if you don't need to have any personnel to do all this, that normally you have a lot of personnel doing it. I don't say that we should only have autonomous, but if you have that, then you can think very differently. You don't need to have as large ships as possible. You can have many small ships instead. They can also choose routes based on a lot of different factors that are not connected to, for example, slot times or anything else. They can change the route depending on, changes in the weather, etc. All these things can be done automatically and autonomous. With the big difference is that if you do that with an extremely large container ship, you do it with all the goods. But if you do it with 20 or 100 small ships, you maybe do it only with a few of them. So there's a typical example of innovation. I've been looking quite a lot on that modeling for on the roadside with autonomous trucks, and also with drones, autonomous drones. Because if you have 1,000 autonomous trucks, and now I'm speaking as a former military officer, logistics officer, then it would be perfect to send them out with their own criteria, so how and where they should transport the goods. And they can do it in 1,000 different ways, which is a nightmare for the enemy because he can't find any pattern. Why are they taking this way? And now they're spread all over, and I have to drop a bomb on this to destroy it. And you can't anymore because it's so divided. So there are a number of interesting aspects of this autonomous vessels. And I can also mention a number of other examples from the naval. If you look at war applications, if you have a huge number of autonomous submarines, for example, that would be a nightmare for an enemy. But I won't go there now.
I can almost hear my audience screaming.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sorry. I take
no
it
problem at all. No problem at all. When I started my podcast 6 years ago, I asked everyone, what do you think about autonomous ships? At that time, that was something completely new. And that was a generational question, because the people who were older than I am, they said that will never happen. Mm-hmm. And the young people said, oh, we can't wait to test it.
Yeah.
But I stopped asking that question because it's already in the water in several places.
Yeah.
Maybe not the way you described it, but I find that interesting. It's a new thought, and I think we should have that. Constantly new thoughts. So who would you be interested in listening to? Who do you think I should interview the next?
Have you talked a little bit with the Kungliga Örlogsmannasällskapet and these guys?
No, I haven't interviewed them yet.
Okay, so that might be an idea, because they have, and from them you can have a lot of new ideas of who to interview. I think that's a good suggestion. Niklas Granholm is a interesting guy who knows a lot about Arctic security. The Arctic is very interesting. I mean, if you want, maybe you already had a pod about the Northern Sea route, north of Russia, which is free from ice now, I think 1 or 2 months per year. That's Niklas knows a lot about that. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you. I will try and get hold of him.
Yeah.
So what is the best part of being in your job, in your position today? What do you like the most?
I would say the overview, so to speak, so to see the whole picture, because normally when you work with, I guess it's the same in every branch and every business, that you normally you get down on quite a deep detail level, And maybe you're not interested in the whole picture. Maybe you are very sort of passionate about the details in your business, but I'm very interested in getting the whole picture. And I think looking into global supply chains and adding the security dimension gives you really the whole picture, because then you reach into politics and macroeconomics and the industry, and everything is sort of is connected there in one way or another. Nobody can sort of ignore the effects that occur in that global supply chain system. So I think that overview is the most exciting part.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Freddy. I think you have opened the eyes of more people than myself with your insights. Of course, we all wish for a more stable world, but as you say, there are so many unknowns that are hard to consider. Sometimes I think that the more I learn, the less I know, and I think you have proved that. Okay, have you finalized your plans for the International Day for Women in Maritime? I'm just wondering, because I'm interested in hearing about your plans. How will you celebrate? What are your views on this special day for the women in the maritime industry? As there will not be any new episode of the Shipping Podcast until May 20th, you will have the chance to tell me about how you celebrated. I am planning a solo episode for the 20th of May. So if you share with me what you did, how you celebrated, I can share that with the listeners. Send me an email at hello@shippingpodcast.com as soon as possible. Whilst we are on the note of what you can do for me, have you subscribed to my newsletter yet? You find it on the website shippingpodcast.com or on the Facebook page of the Shipping Podcast. Just go over there and subscribe. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a Shipping Podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.